Welcome to Only in America. I'm Ali Nurani.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only America.
Only in America.
This week, how a public service academy is rewriting the rules on how to make a meaningful contribution to our communities and our nation.
It's no longer the case that the public sector alone can solve a problem. No longer the case that the private sector can go out and solve a certain problem. It takes public, private, nonprofit, and of course in the international context many times, or if we look at Hurricane Florence, the military, to come in and solve the vexing challenges that we face as a nation.
And getting outside of our comfort zone.
Public service to me means that you are somebody that actively works to make the community that you live in better. And for that to happen, you have to be very much like in the pulse of things. So you can't just live your life in your little bubble. You kind of have to get out of your comfort zone to kind of really understand what's going on and be able to be there and actively change your community.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Nurani. Growing up, my father owned a physical therapy practice in Salinas, California. And the first thing that you saw every time you walked into that office was Norman Rockwell's iconic 1961 illustration, Golden Rule. Originally completed for the United Nations, where in fact the original mosaic still hangs, the drawing is a group of people of different religions, races, and ethnicity serving as the backdrop for the inscription, "Do unto other as you would have them do unto you." So from early on in my life, when I would go to my father's office to help, this is what I saw every single time I walked in that door. And that idea of caring for others, of public service, I think it just became a part of me. Which brings me to our guests this week, Brett Hunt and Sara Nieves Pereia of the Arizona State University Public Service Academy. The Academy is the brainchild of Tom Brokaw and Dr. Michael Crow. They opened it in August of 2015, and it is the first of its kind program in the nation. Its goal is to develop tomorrow's leaders by teaching them to collaborate effectively with those in the private and public sectors and in different industries and spheres. Brokaw, inspired by the greatest generation, had long championed the idea of finding meaningful ways for new generations of citizens to serve locally and globally. And credit ASU President Michael Crow, who's actually been a guest here on Only in America, with knowing a great idea when he sees one. Brokaw and Crow appeared on the Today Show shortly after the announcement back in 2015.
What happens with this academy, and what exactly will take place when students are a part of that?
Well, think of it like ROTC, but it's to produce civilian leaders for civilian roles. So we're building an academy where people will learn practical aspects of leadership. They'll take their regular major. They'll have scholarships. They'll be training side by side with future military officers. And to produce these new kinds of leaders, we've created this new academy, this new environment for them.
I had the pleasure of chatting with Brett Hunt and Sara Nieves Pereia last September while visiting ASU. Brett is the executive director of the Public Service Academy. He arrived at the new academy with a pretty impressive array of credentials. 4 years as a captain in the U.S. Army, with tours in Kuwait and Iraq, time as a foreign service officer, and vice consul in Guadalajara. He worked in the private sector in the agricultural industry, and in fact, he did a stint with us here at the National Immigration Forum. Sara is a student at the academy as well as its communications lead. Originally from Portugal's Azores Islands, she recently became a U.S. citizen. She and her American-born husband moved to his home state of Arizona back in 2011. We talked about the values that Brett instills in students of the Public Service Academy: responsibility, integrity, and selflessness, the importance of diversity, and the role of immigrant public servants. Sara spoke about the traumatic transition after immigrating to the U.S., leaving her comfort zone to help others, and what public service means to her. Let me start with Sara. How do you find yourself here in Phoenix, Arizona?
Well, the short answer to that is I married an American who was from Arizona.
That is your first mistake.
I know, right? I always joke around and say, why couldn't you not be from New York or Boston? Like, Arizona is so far away. But yeah, so we got married in the Azores, which is where I'm from. But that was 2011, and the recession had just hit there. And for a little island, when the recession hits, things get pretty bad. but I was not stranger to that, so it didn't impact me as much as it did him, and he needed that sense of stability, so he wanted to come back.
Plus, you also took a desert boy and put him on an island.
Yes, he did have some like island fever. This is true.
And Brett, how do you find yourself here at ASU?
So I was born and raised about 2 hours from here in Globe, Arizona. I'm sure you've heard of it. And then after heading off to the University of Colorado at Boulder, I was an Army officer, Foreign Service officer, and then in the private sector, both in agriculture and then working on immigration reform before coming over to ASU to lead the Public Service Academy in about 2015 is when I started over here.
So tell me a little bit about the Public Service Academy.
So Public Service Academy were founded really out of the idea of Tom Brokaw and our president, which is Dr. Michael Crow, which is this idea that every young American should be engaged in service to the nation as kind of a prerequisite for the country. And we don't mean everybody needs to go in the military. Nobody wants that. We're not looking for that. But it's really born out of his scholarship around the Greatest Generation and this idea that during World War II, everybody was committed to serving the nation in some capacity or another. You were either my grandfather in the Pacific, the U.S. Army, or you were my grandmother with a victory garden in the yard and working in a factory. Mm-hmm. So he asked, how do we kind of re-engage young Americans in service to the nation in all of these different ways, and part of that is the Public Service Academy. What we do is develop character-driven leaders, and we focus on cross-sector leadership because what we recognize is that that's how things get done these days. It's no longer the case that the public sector alone can solve a problem. No longer the case that the private sector can go out and solve a certain problem. It takes public, private, nonprofit, and of course in the international context many times, or if we look at Hurricane Florence, the military, to come in and solve the vexing challenges that we face as a nation. Mm-hmm. So that's the short version of what we do in the Public Service Academy.
So then what brought you here to the Public Service Academy, Sara?
Well, when I immigrated to the United States, it was a traumatic transition, and there was like a set playbook, like rules that I needed to follow that I didn't even understand, right? And so when I came to terms that my degree was not going to count, that all of my work experience was something that they were like, well, we can't really prove that you've done this. And because I had no network, I had to go back to school. And I started at a community college, Paradise Valley Community College. And I was very fortunate to meet Rowdy Duncan there, who is someone that is very service-oriented. And I kind of started to get engaged because it was kind of like my way into understanding my place here and what the dynamic was. And by the time I graduated from community college, I was afraid of coming to ASU and not being able to replicate my engagement because every institution is somewhat closed off sometimes in the beginning and you kind of have to work at engagement. And so when the Next Generation Service Corps came along, I was like, this is perfect for me because it fits my values of what I want to do and gave me an opportunity to kind of step up on my level of engagement.
What does public service mean to you?
Public service to me means that you are somebody that actively works to make the community that you live in better. And for that to happen, you kind of have to be very much like in the pulse of things. So you can't just live your life in your little bubble. You kind of have to get out of your comfort zone to kind of really understand what's going on and be able to be there and actively change your community.
Do you think there's a difference between being a volunteer and being in public service?
Yes. I think when you are a volunteer, you do great things. Volunteers do great things, but you tend to only go into what you feel comfortable with. So you'll volunteer at your church, you'll volunteer in an organization that you have some sort of affinity that values. A public service person will have to face things that they might not agree, that they didn't know before. You have to dig deeper than just going and volunteer somewhere. For instance, an example was I always had an extreme bias towards anything that was Republican or law enforcement, right? Because in my experience as an immigrant, you are told over and over, whether it's by the narrative or the people around you, that law enforcement and Republicans just hate you. And as a public service person, I can't really discriminate against Republicans or law enforcement. They are part of the community too. They also go through things, and their experience are as valid as mine. What led some of them to their extremist views might also be what caused my pain on my side. So as a public service person, I have to go over that, to go and understand what is going on in order to change.
So then, from both of your perspectives, how do you share and how do you teach this sense of public service?
It's a great question. So we put it up front in everything that we do, and we actually start, and Sara will probably smile as I say this, but we talk about values right up front. The reason she's going to smile is because I'm constantly repeating myself on values. But we really...
You're going to say that one more time?
Values, right? We really level ourselves with that conversation, right? With, if you will, setting norms. So within our organization, it's going to be respect, responsibility, integrity, and selflessness. That's what we expect of each other. And when folks come into our organization, we're going to ask them, you know, do you agree with those values? Can you rectify with being in an organization that wears those values right up front? And we do that as an exercise for our students to be able to go out and do public service as a way of not only benefiting the community, but really turning themselves into infrastructure for the nation. One of the things in the founding of the Public Service Academy that we talked about was this idea that many times in times of crisis in our country, we resort to military leadership. We've seen that during wars. We see that, I would tender, today. We kind of default because that's the place where we train public service leaders. There's a coherent program. We know what we're getting, right, more or less. And we need to, as a nation, diversify that talent pool. We need to bring in folks that are not just military, but are engineers, doctors, nonprofit leaders, civil servants who have the leadership ability to step up and be leadership infrastructure for our nation when we need it. And so we really expand that idea of public service to that. So I want the engineering major. I want the marketing major. I want the aerospace engineering major. I want the history major. I want the graphic design major. I want all of those components because we require character-driven, purpose-driven public servant leadership in all of those sectors. So it's no longer the case, again, that we just need to train a civil service and the country will be fine.
Right.
We need folks across all the sectors who are imbued with those values.
It goes back to that cross-disciplinary approach to problem
Cross-sector.
solving. Right. So then, as students are coming in, some of them are born here, some of them are not. What's your sense of kind of their experience with public service or their understanding of it, and how do you see them moving through the program?
Well, I can give a few insights, and then Sara, I'd love to go to you because we see, first of all, a lot of folks who have a propensity to public service are coming with a religious background. They may have been involved with that volunteering or that service growing up. We find people that are children of military, so who maybe aren't going in the military but desire that service. And I would actually say the majority of the folks that come into our program, and I would not have told you this in 2015 when we started this program, are actually coming in because they want to serve something larger than themselves, but they no longer see a public service institution as the means to doing that. And what I mean by that, so when I was coming up, I want to do public service, I'm going to go in the military, foreign service, I'm going to go work for the state, I'm going to go work the legislature and run for office. That's no longer the case among the students we see. They want to impact something, but they want to impact it, frankly, in their own way and on their own terms. And so that's been a real learning curve for us as we've developed out the program.
And you started your answer talking about people and their faith perspectives. Do they still see their churches as a place where they can be engaged in public service, or does that not meet that need?
Absolutely. No, absolutely it does. I've had some folks push back on us, right, in seeing a faith perspective and that as a service component, right? We're a state university, right? Should we be doing that? And I believe as the director until they fire me, yes, right? They are giving them themselves to something larger than themselves. They have a lens, another person has a lens, other person has a lens. And absolutely that faith component is critical to it. We have a lot of students who come to our organization and then go on a mission. So we have a large LDS community in Arizona, and those students are incredible, and they're giving of themselves to something larger than themselves, and that's the mindset we want inside of our organization. I will also say, starting the conversation around values, as I say again, the students who are coming from a faith perspective, they're comfortable already talking about that in a way that students that maybe have not in the past, been comfortable. So we do a lot of kind of leveling, talking about values.
Is there a different approach that an immigrant student will bring to the program, or a different set of experiences? How do they move through this process?
What I see among my immigrant students is, first of all, they're not identifying, like coming out and being like, hey, I'm an immigrant, right? It comes out as we get to know each other, but they're taking advantage of the opportunity in a way that I can't say I see across the entire population. They see the value in the opportunity to be part of an organization like ours. They see the value in all of the different components in a way that I wouldn't generally say is shared across the population.
For me, this program, right now, with how unstable the climate for immigrants, even legal immigrants at this point is, I feel like even let's say that something goes terribly wrong and I have to leave the country, which would be dramatic. I built a life here. I have 2 children here and family and a life and all of that. But I feel like everything that I've learned in this program, I really can apply anywhere in the world, because the way that classes for our certificates are set up, the networking that we do, the people that we meet, it's not just local, it's at a global scale. And so if I found myself back home, I think everything that I learned here would be amazing to implement in my own country. And then conversely, I think that if I do stay, one of the things that immigrants sometimes feel is that you always have to prove yourself more, right? You always have to prove that you do have a place here. To me, that's kind of how it started. But then in the process of proving that I had a place here, I learned how to love this country and wanted to really make it better, and knowing that my experience and my devotion can actually help that. So when you go through this program and you get those tools to do that, then when you graduate, you're not at a loss. I feel like the moment I get my diploma, I have this feeling that everything was going to be okay, because I'll know how to move forward.
So the way I've been thinking about this is that most Americans have 3 fears when it comes to immigration. There's a security fear, an economic fear, and then a cultural fear. Security, are immigrants threats or protectors? Economically, are immigrants giving or taking? But then culturally, are immigrants integrating or isolating?
Yeah.
So I guess my question here is public service and what you're doing at the academy for the students that are with you who are immigrants, is it in essence a strategy for them to become American?
I don't think it really goes that way, meaning that I'm not forced to think a certain way. I'm forced to recognize the values of different sectors. That's part of what you learn. You go through this way of understanding how the system works, but I'm never asked to be the system, right? So I'm never asked to conform. I'm actually asked to do the opposite, bring vision, bring mission, bring passion into the system so that I can make it better, help with change or with maximizing whatever system that already works.
But it's also, do you want to improve that system to serve you, the Azorean community in Phoenix, or everybody living in the state?
Curious thing, there's no Azorean community in the Azores. I've looked.
I was trying to be very, very local.
No, and that's a fair question. One thing that I learn is that in the United States, there's there's the main culture, right? For immigrants and non-immigrants or children of immigrants, the idea that they are threatening the culture of the United States, it should be at this point outdated, because there's the mainstream culture in America was never mainstream, meaning that everything that makes to the mainstream is taken from Cinco de Mayo is not American, right? It's not even really Mexican.
What about St. Patrick's Day? Oh, no, that's
right?
not.
It's Irish.
Right?
Yeah. And everything like that. You have the mainstream culture of America is just great at picking from other cultures and kind of make it popular. And so I feel like I don't want to change things to benefit me, because if I'm only benefiting me or my community, then I'm not really making anything much better, right? I'm just doing the same with a different tone. To me, I feel like the polarizing of this country is coming from miscommunication most of the time, and from that fear of well, if you get this, then what do I get, right? And I think that we tend to look at things with the deficit, scarcity. Well, there's not enough for everybody. And that's, I think, the main issue. I don't go with that mindset. I go with the mindset that we can actually create something where everyone gets what they need, and we can eventually maybe not completely accept everybody, because that takes a long time, but maybe in my lifetime we can at least live together and respect each other in that sense, because there's things that happens that don't need to happen.
Right. So then, Brett, from your perspective, the role, the importance of public service, whether it's here in the academy or even going back to your experience serving in Afghanistan and Iraq, do you see public service as, in essence, an integration strategy?
I see it as a unifying strategy, a unifying force. When folks come together around a common purpose and with a mission in mind, a lot of what dictates the way we behave outside in the rest of the world strips away as you come together for a common cause, when you're moving towards that common goal. And yes, I see our work in the Public Service Academy as a unifying force. We talk not a lot about, patriotism in America and those types of things. We do talk about our community, and we do talk about our nation, because I interpret nation to be something a lot different than country, right? So we want to be that unifying force. We want to give a diverse population of students that come from across Arizona, across the country, and across the world, from Uganda, El Salvador. We have some students from some of the U.S. territories. And so we want to bring a unifying force around folks that want to go out and improve humanity, make the world a better place in a very simplistic, naive way of saying it, and give them that common purpose. Because what we've seen in our organization is that we are far and away stronger because of our diversity, not weaker. And that runs counter to what, if you turned on the news today, you would hear. And if you look at the political ads, what you would hear. And there's no jury that's out on that for us, right, and for our organization. That's just a fact. ASU is a great place for us to be, because in our charter, ASU wants to be known not by whom we exclude, but rather by whom we include and how they succeed. And that's critical, right? The whole part of it, right? That we're not going to be this exclusive institution that's going to say we accept 0.04% of the applicants. Look at us, right? But rather say, anybody that wants to come and learn, A, B, maybe even a C student, come here and learn with us, go out to the community, and then come back when you need that next level to push yourself forward. And we're not only going to be known by whom we include, but we're also going to be responsible for their success. It doesn't end once you pay your tuition bill, right? We want to be responsible for your success in moving forward. And it almost comes to this long-term, in my mind, unifying strategy, not just here at Arizona State, not just in the Public Service Academy, but as we expand this idea around the country, that if we can unify around that idea, that it's not a zero-sum game. We're not fighting over this small piece of pie that I'm going to get more, you're going to get more, and somebody's going to be angry. Rather, let's increase the size of it. There's room enough for everybody, and there is. If we can be a unifying force to move towards that mindset, that's what we want to be doing.
Time kind of flew by on us.
I know.
So I have one last request. The name of the podcast is Only in America. So if both of you finish this sentence, only in America, ...
Only in America are we continually evolving.
Only in America can I visit almost all the nations in the other countries.
Thank you very much, Brett, Sara. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado, eu.
That's all the Portuguese I know.
That's perfect.
Thank you very much. This is great. Brett Hunt is the Executive Director of the Public Service Academy at the Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions at Arizona State University. Go Sundowns. Originally from Portugal, Sara Nieves Pereia is a student at the Academy, and she recently became a U.S. citizen. For more information about Brett and Sara, visit our website, immigrationforum.org, and while you're there, take a minute to subscribe to Only in America.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
Only in America is produced by Regina Medina and Emily Chow. Our sound editor this week is Joanna Taylor. Kathleen Farrell is the executive producer, and I'm Ali Noorani. Thanks for listening.